We wanted to touch on this story that happened on Tuesday, and I think we were all kind of caught by surprise, shock, to find out that in broad daylight, a woman was shot outside a Montreal beauty parlor hair salon that she co-owned, and trying to understand what was going on, because it looks like once we started finding out what was going on, the woman is, it turns out, was the daughter-in-law of a well-connected Montreal mobster who himself was killed in Acapulco many, many years ago. And the thing I think that stunned everyone, beyond the fact that this happened literally in broad daylight and the assailant apparently took off, is the fact that it happened at all, because typically when we've seen these kinds of things happen in Montreal over the years, women have not been involved. It's always usually men. So we wanted to find out a bit more. James PAIXAO is an inspector with the SPVM's Criminal Investigation Unit. He's on the line right now. Mr. PAIXAO, thanks for being here.
Good afternoon, Mr. Ryan.
Am I correct in saying that we have not, I know we had an issue a while ago with Leonardo Rizzuto being shot, but these things typically happen with Montreal male mafia members. The fact that this happened, what does that signal?
Well, obviously it is very rare, but for now the investigation is still very at its first stages, and we don't really know exactly the mobile of the crime. And when we figure out what actually happened, we'll be able to understand more of the reasons behind this situation. But obviously, it's not fun for nobody to find out that a woman has been killed like this on broad daylight. I can understand how everybody is a bit distressed by this.
So, I mean, with respect to the Montreal police, you obviously have a unit within the police that looks into mob-related, gang-related crime. And I'm just wondering, given the previous thing I mentioned, that attack on Leonardo Rizzuto not that long ago, are things stepping up in that area, or is this the kind of thing you would typically expect to see?
Well, if we look at the history in Montreal, obviously Montreal, the way it's situated in North America, is very lucrative for organized crime. And it's close to the United States. The Port of Montreal is very present. So we've had presence from of different organized crime factions for years now. A lot of big investigations that were done by, for example, the RCMP Montreal and the QPP, destabilized all these organizations. And what happens is that other organizations were able to take more place here in Montreal and continue in controlling different illegal activities. Mm-hmm. And what that does is now we have these organizations that we believe they work together to be able to continue in Montreal and do all these illegal, for example, drug sales, drug importation, and for example, lately all these stolen vehicles who are sent overseas. This is all stuff done by organized crime. And this collaboration is very volatile. And what could happen is sometimes there's things that happen between factions. And sometimes it's just control within a certain faction that's trying to be taken over or stuff like that. All this can happen. So for the case that you're speaking, we can't really talk right now of why it happened. It's still very early in the investigation to be able to give you a reason. But right now, this is pretty much what's going on in Montreal.
You know, I understand the fact that this is an ongoing investigation. I mentioned off the top, just before you came on, that on that same day, literally not even 12 hours later, you found someone else outside a warehouse. I guess this is up in Montreal North, or around that area. What looked like, again, an organized mob hit. Do these things sort of, wax and wane? Do we go through a whole area or a whole time where you suddenly start to see things going on and then it gets quiet for months or years at a time? Is that the history of how this works?
Well, if I can say, organized crime, they live off society, and they don't want to scare society, and they don't want to bring attention to them by using all this violence, okay? Usually, they're very quiet, and we've seen for years where there's nothing going on in Montreal. But now, because of what's going on, we're having a bit more of these cases. And this year, for example, we've had the gun-related cases have gone down this year, actually, from January to April, which we're very happy about that. Because, we put everything we can to make sure that it stays low. But the last 3 murders that happened in Montreal were very targeted murders. And that's why it's probably related to organized crime. But we're still investigating each one to figure it out. The first one, we made arrests. And now we see this happen, the last 2 in one day. It's very rare, but unfortunately it happens. It doesn't mean that they're related. Could just happen that 2 different things happening at the same time.
I'm going to ask you, maybe it's unfair, but to speculate to some degree, I heard someone mention that, maybe this has to do with a generational change in who's running, the underworld, if you want to call it the mafia here, in the city. And with the new generation, some of the old rules are just off the table. Do you think there's any truth to that?
Well, these old rules that everybody talks about, that where you're not supposed to, like you mentioned at the beginning of the interview, you're not supposed to attack women, and with these new generations, it's a new way of doing things. I can give you an example. There was the Italian police went into a raid one point, and they found these mafioso rules, and one of the rules was not to go into bars. Well, I can tell you that that doesn't happen anymore. They're all in the bars. We even have a special team that visits them in Montreal bars. So I believe that with the new generations, it's a new way of doing things, and what's most important for them is making money.
So we talked about the murders. I mean, that's the focus here because, as I said, broad daylight, not the kind of thing you'd expect to see in Montreal. But then I read the headline this morning. You've seen this. There have been over 220 arsons so far this year, and there have been a flurry of them just in the last couple of weeks. You've got to assume that a lot of that is about extortion, so we're tied into that as well?
Well, there's a lot of, when we're talking about arson, there's a lot of different reasons why there's arson fires in Montreal and everywhere. For example, we have some arson fires which is related to insurance fraud. We have arson fires, for example, to eliminate the competition. Somebody opens up a business and somebody opens up right beside and they're losing money. That happens also. You have what you say which is extortion, where we're seeing a little bit more of that right now, where it seems like organized crime is in certain areas, for example, Middle Eastern organized crime, and the Italian organized crime is like that also, where they'll use extortion as a protection tax, and then they'll use these arsons to intimidate the people to pay, which is possible. Sometimes it's people who borrowed money and owe money, and they're being intimidated to pay. But for example, Shylocking. Mm-hmm. And we also have other cases where it's just people who have mental illness who have done fires, and we've had some of that also. So it's a whole melting pot. We can't say it's only one reason, as you can see.
Right. I wonder, is it fair then to ask beyond that? And I get it. And I should mention, too, by the way, when you say 220 arsons, that's obviously a lot. And then I saw that for all of last year, there were almost 500, like 470 some odd. So I hate to say this is par for Montreal, but we're not seeing things go down. We're seeing them pretty much be stable. Is there a faction war going on right now? Are there still, as there have been in the past, different families, and that's really what's going on here?
It's hard to say. It's hard to say if it's within the different factions which this is going on, because it's a bit of mix of everything. But obviously, we've seen that more of we believe to be arsons related to protection tax. But like I say, each investigation will bring us the reason why, and when we find out, we do all we can to make sure it stops.
Okay, and by the way, again, to be fair, we don't hear about the arrests. There have been plenty of arrests in here, right? With respect to these fires. Sure. So we don't get to hear that. Generally, it's like, oh no, there's been a fire. We assume it's just going to keep going. What are there, 34 arrests in these fires? Did I read that right?
Yes, exactly. And just for example, last week in 2 nights, the police officers arrested 3 people in 2 nights that were related to arson fires. Because, we take this very seriously, obviously. This and gun violence are 2 most important cases that we're doing right now in Montreal, because it's very important and it puts lives in danger. So what we have, for example, our local police stations do active patrols. We do intelligence gathering to figure out what's going on, who do we target. We use every investigation technique that we have available to make sure that we can find the culprits of these arsons and make sure it stops.
Listen, again, it's shocking to see something like this happen in Montreal. And obviously, you said an ongoing investigation. Maybe we'll find out more. Did we learn anything in the Rizzuto attempted shooting or the attempted murder?
Well, the Rizzuto murder is not under our investigation. It belongs to the QPP, so okay. I'll let them talk about it.
Fair enough. All right. Mr. PAIXAO, appreciate the time. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
You too. James PAIXAO, he's an inspector with the SPVM's Criminal Investigation Unit. And I will tell you, it's not only because it happened in broad daylight, someone running up and shooting someone dead, this woman, the 39-year-old woman with links to the Montreal Mafia, but when it hits kind of close to home, it was at a salon called Deauville, which is where I happen to go to get my hair cut. So I'm trying to think now for the people working there, what's that going to be like for the next little while, seeing that actually happen? So it's one of those things you can't imagine happening in a city like Montreal, but it did.